Check, check, check. Uh, In about a minute's time. Thank you. Okay, greetings. Thank you for joining us this morning, Thursday, the 21st of March, 2024, for our Emergency Preparedness Protective Services Committee meeting, agenda number 10, and I'll ask our clerk to call the roll.
Councillor Bradley.
Here.
Councillor DeRush.
Here.
Councillor Dudas.
I'm here.
Councillor Devine.
Here.
Councillor Hubley.
Here.
Councillor Kelly.
Here.
Conseillère Plante.
Ici.
And Chair, Acting Chair Hill.
Present.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Brockington. Councillor Brockington may be joining us remotely.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll start off with a land acknowledgement. The City of Ottawa is located on the unceded, never surrendered territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe First Nations people. They've been stewards of the land here for millennia, and we honor and recognize them. Just a few opening remarks this morning. I'm going to be chairing this meeting today because our normal chair, Councillor Brockington, is in transit today. He may be able to join us for parts of this meeting, and Councillor Devine has agreed to step up as vice, and he's got a motion he's going to present today too. So thank you very much for that, Sean. We have two presentations for us today. First, the Director of Public Safety Service, Beth Gooding, will be providing an update on trends influencing the city's emergency management program and the 2024 program priorities. Then Pierre Poirier, the Chief of the Ottawa Paramedic Service, will be providing an update on the launch of the long-awaited implementation of the medical priority dispatch system in Ottawa by the province. The city has been a long-time advocate for the need to modernize the emergency health services system to improve our services to residents, and has been advocating for the implementation of this system in Ottawa for years. The MPDS is the gold standard in dispatch deployment and is used widely across Canada and the United States. And I'm pleased that this system, which is expected to improve the ability of the paramedics to attend the highest priority calls, will soon be live in our city. Are there any declarations of interest? We'll move then to the confirmation of minutes. Has everyone had a chance to review the minutes from the committee meeting of Thursday, 15 February? Are they confirmed?
Confirmed.
I will then ask Serial 4.1, the Emergency Management Program update, our first item on the agenda. It was deferred from our February meeting because this is not a ceremonial presentation. We will require a motion to add this presentation to our agenda, so I'd like to ask Vice Chair, Councillor Devine, to read out the motion.
Your bylaw being bylaw 2022-410, the Emergency Preparedness and Protective Services Committee waive the rules of procedure to receive a presentation from the Director, Public Safety Service, Emergency and Protective Services regarding the Emergency Management Program update on today's EPPSC agenda, and that pursuant to subsection 83(4)A of the procedure bylaw, the committee dispensed with the requirement for staff to provide a separate written report on this presentation.
Is that carried?
All right.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Ayotte.
Thank you, Chair. I have Director Beth Gooding with me today, and she'll proceed with the presentation, and we'd be happy to answer any questions following the presentation. Thank you.
So thank you for the opportunity to provide an update on the activities of the city's emergency management program. On a été heureux d'avoir l'opportunité ce matin de donner une mise à jour du programme de gestion des situations d'urgence de la ville d'Ottawa. Next slide. So we've got a short presentation, and on our agenda, we're really focusing on two main things. We want to explain how recent emergencies and our current operating context is influencing the priorities of the emergency management program. And and we'd also like to explain the linkages between the city's emergency management program and the city's climate resiliency strategy. So this is just a quick reminder that under the Provincial Emergency Management and Civil Protection Act, all municipalities are required to have an emergency management program. And we're also required to do specific things under that act. The top three would be, number one, we're supposed to have a municipal emergency plan. Number two, we're supposed to have a training program so that staff are ready to respond to emergencies. And number three, we're supposed to have a public engagement program to help residents prepare for the next emergency. The city's emergency management program is supported by a small and mighty Office of Emergency Management, but we always like to remind people that the city's emergency management program is a citywide program. So it's all departments, all services, all boards. Next slide. Donc, l'année 2023 démontre très bien que il y a des différents types d'urgences qui peuvent franchement survenir à tout instant. So all we're doing with this slide is showing you the different types of planned and unplanned events that the city prepared for, responded to, and recovered from in 2023. Next slide. So this is just a quick overview of our program accomplishments in 2023. We're not going to spend too much time on this slide because we'll be coming back to some of these concepts in the next couple of slides. But we did want to highlight that we're always trying to find the balance between our requirement to respond and recover from the different types of emergencies like the ones we shared on the previous slide, and then our requirement to prevent, mitigate, and prepare for the next emergency, which is critically important. So we always have that programmatic balance that we're seeking. Next slide. So this is where we start to make linkages to the city's climate resiliency strategy. I had the opportunity recently to hear a speech by the author John Vaillant. He wrote Fire Weather, which was about the Fort McMurray wildfires. And he characterized our current climate change environment as being one of instability. And that really resonated with me because it's very hard for us to predict exactly what's going to happen in the next 6 to 12 months from a weather perspective. But what we do know is that we're becoming more prone to severe weather events. Next slide. And here's recent examples of different weather events that we've experienced in Ottawa over the past several years. So we've had riverine flooding and overland flooding. We've had a derecho. We've had tornadoes. We've had an ice storm, and we've also had poor air quality due to wildfire smoke. Yeah. Next slide. We also wanted to talk a little bit about some of the other trends that are influencing our program priorities. So the city has an aging population. We also have residents who continue to experience systemic barriers to opportunity. And it's worth noting our large geography because what we are acutely aware of is that residents in urban, suburban, and rural areas experience emergencies differently. And so a one-size-fits-all approach is not appropriate for our city. Also, we are very dependent as a society on critical infrastructure, in particular hydroelectricity and telecommunications. And so those present additional risks. But, you know, this presentation is meant to be a very positive one. Our general manager, Kim Ayat, is always instilling in us a sense of positivity and hope. And we're really encouraged and energized by some of the positive opportunities that we're seeing out there related to emergency management. And in particular, what we're seeing is residents and community groups who are interested and eager to help and prepare for the next emergency, and particularly at the community level, which is really important. And we'll be talking about that more on the next slide. We're also seeing that the province of Ontario and the federal government are rethinking approaches to emergency management in Canada. And so as a result, you know, there's opportunities for new programming and potentially, you know, new resourcing. And so we're excited to be able to partner with higher levels of government going forward more closely. And we're always interested in capitalizing on new technology to improve our preparedness, response, and recovery operations. And a good example of that is the drone capability that our Ottawa Fire Services have and that we use in our emergency response and recovery work. Next slide. Oh, is it? Okay, so this slide is very high level, but I would argue that it's the most important of our presentation in that it provides an overview of our top areas of focus for 2024. And we also wanted to mention that a key priority for 2024 climate change funding is to support an additional temporary staff member in the Office of Emergency Management who will augment the work that we're doing related to community resiliency. So that's obviously subject to committee and council approval of a prioritization framework on climate resiliency that will be brought forward shortly by our colleagues in the Planning, Real Estate, and Economic Development Department. And when we talk about building community resilience, we're really talking about two types of activities. The first is increased communications and information sharing. And the second is helping community groups better prepare for emergencies. In terms of the communications piece, we're really excited to be working with different departments and services and our public information and media relations group to make the ottawa.ca website a true one-stop shop for emergency management information. So to be a sort of trusted and comprehensive source. And so that's something that we're working on from a comms piece. And in terms of our you know, working with groups to build community resilience, just wanted to provide a couple of quick examples. So as you know, we've been working for a while now with the Ottawa Food Bank and their network of food partners to really finesse our emergency food security protocol. And so that's work that's ongoing. It's finalized, but we're always trying to improve our roles and responsibilities and the speed at which we can mobilize, you know. We have also been working with community associations and faith-based groups who are interested and capable of supporting the city during an emergency, including with respect to things like wellness visits. And we're getting some really interesting outreach from, you know, organizations who are putting up their hand and saying that they'd love for us to consider use of their facility as an emergency reception center during an emergency. And that's very important, especially in certain parts of the city where the city may not have as many of our own facilities that could be used for something like that. The last two bullets on this slide are pretty self-explanatory. Our city readiness is really about the training and exercise that we give to staff to prepare for the next emergency. And the last bullet may seem a little bit boring, but that's the work that we're doing to really finesse our food security protocol, our wellness visit protocol, and our volunteer management protocol. It's so important for us to have strong plans in place and then to test them and make sure they work before we need to use them, you know? Je voulais aussi souligner le fait qu'en temps de nos activités d'engagement communautaire, on en profite également. C'est tellement important pour nous d'être à l'écoute des résidents afin de pouvoir mieux comprendre leurs besoins. Next slide. So this is our last slide here. Oops, okay. We just wanted to close off by highlighting new pieces of work for 2024. We've already talked about the climate resiliency piece, so I'll just quickly mention our emergency management strategy and the public alerting system. So we are developing a new emergency management strategy to guide the priorities of the city's emergency management program over the next several years. And it's really a best practice in emergency management to focus on the needs of those residents who face the most systemic barriers to opportunity, because in so doing, we better support the entire population. And so that's what we're embedding into a key principle of our strategy. And we have mentioned before a public alerting system. So we're working very closely with public information and media relations, as well as the Ottawa Police Service, to develop a low-tech public alerting tool that will enable the city and the Ottawa Police Service to send text messages to residents during and after an emergency to provide them with guidance and advice. So I think that's it. In closing, we're very excited about the work that we're doing. Very excited by the level of engagement we're seeing in the community. And again, very happy to have had the chance to give you this program update. Merci.
Thank you very much, Beth and Kim. We have no delegates on this item, and we will go now to questions from committee members. So over to Councillor Dudas.
Thank you very much, Chair Hill. I wanted to start by saying, I think, Beth, that the point that you brought up about, taking this from a position of optimism and opportunity, it certainly sounds like as if from an organizational standpoint, we're doing just that. And I think I'm grateful for that, because I think that in this circumstance, when we're talking about the impacts of climate change, which our city has felt its fair share of, there is almost a sense of looking at the doom and gloom of it, of the extreme impacts from a negative perspective. And that is truly the case. But to be able to prepare for it in the best way that we can, to not be reactive, to look at it from an opportunity to bring people together, to educate them, to prepare them. I'm very glad that as a city, that's the position we're taking, because we have to be those leaders and we have to provide people with a sense of hope. So I'm grateful for you for taking it from that perspective. I also noted too that you said it's not a one size fits all. And I think it's very, as city councillors, we know that we represent one of the largest municipalities in North America from a geographic standpoint, but also incredibly diverse, rural, suburban, urban, interurban. We have very nuanced communities. And then if you layer on the people we serve and how diverse they are, there's just extra nuances that we have to take into account. So I am happy to hear that. We saw I'll give the example of the DeRay show and just the impact it had on our suburban communities, urban, and then we look at the rural and the devastation that caused. So I'm very pleased to know that that's being taken into account. Now, my question is, it's actually a little bit less of that, because I know you're going to continue to keep us updated on this progress. The public alert piece of it, and you mentioned text messages. I know that, I feel like I've been through, and all of us have been through the ringer on these circumstances. I've had water main breaks and power outages on numerous occasions, and storms and tornadoes, and we've had other communities impacted by flooding and things like that. Cell phones, electricity, internet have not been reliable. We can't always count on them to be there. And I am assuming, because you're the experts in this field, that we're looking at other means of keeping our communities and our public informed. Are there other new elements of that public alerting system that you're looking at that don't rely on having a charged cell phone or access to internet when maybe those things aren't a possibility?
Thank you, Chair. Great question. Actually, we understand the importance of being resilient in all of our different communication methods. And texting is only one method. And there's a great segment of our population that do not text. So we're certainly not going to put all our eggs in one basket, if you will. But I'll ask Beth to speak to this as well, or sorry, Director Gooding to speak to this as well. The reality is this is where we need your help as well in your communities because of the vast nature of our geography and the city. Having your assistance in helping provide information, receive information, and back and forth. So we have developed those systems in the past. They always need to be tweaked, and we always can do better. And I'm very proud of the staff and the work that they do to try and improve those types of communication methods. The more intelligence we get from what's happening out in the communities, the better decisions we can make. So it's crucial that we access and that we communicate in as many different media as possible, whether it's radio, television, posters, flyers, any type of information method is certainly we need to consider and we need to plan for or pre-plan for so that we're available to action them when they're required. I'll just ask Beth if she has anything else. Sorry, Director Gooding, if she has anything else to add.
Thank you. No, that was great. I'll just say that, so the text messages are kind of a good option, even when cell phone networks are overwhelmed and data is not available. Text messages often get through, but we're always scanning the environment, talking to other municipalities, looking for best practices and talking to residents on how we can improve our communications. And that community engagement piece is another part of that, because what we're finding is that the community associations and the faith-based groups are what I call force multipliers. And what they are able to do is be our boots on the ground and reach people by face-to-face modes, even when technology isn't available. And so that's part of our strategy. Thanks.
And I appreciate that. And I think, I had a wonderful example of a community association. I have numerous community associations. All of them are very interested in participating. I'll give one example of the Blackburn Community Association that recently hosted an emergency preparedness night and had city staff come out, but we had fire was there. There was a number of other groups, but they also demonstrated a desire to have boots on the ground. I know that not all communities have that mobilization right now in terms of a unified association. They might have other types of organizations. We have faith-based groups, we have different entities. So I'm so happy to see that city staff are engaging with them. What I would say though, is just knowing that not every single neighborhood has an entity that we can then, even as counselors, call up and say, listen, boots on the ground, we need to deploy. There might be other ways that the city can identify those communities that don't have that, and then prioritize that in terms of leaflets or things. And I know you know this, you're already doing this through your wellness checks, but I am just stressing the need to maybe revert back to an older time period where we door knock more or get out there if there is the need. And I know you're already doing it, but I just want to get that on the record that it's really important to kind of be in touch with people one-on-one.
Wholeheartedly. We see the value in serving our residents. We're not going to replace technology or replace old methods with new technology. We're going to supplement them and we're going to improve them. And as a result of that, we will hopefully communicate more and better, and we'll continue to do our wellness checks. And the best people in our community are those who serve it as well, not only those who live in it, but also those who serve it. And that's why we take advantage of our fire service and our paramedic service to help with those wellness checks and to go out and knock on doors to make sure that people are okay. That's not going to stop. That's going to continue. We'll just be in a better position to allocate those resources to those communities that actually need it versus, duplicating resources or duplicating efforts where community-based associations or committees are there to help as well. So, but thank you very much for that. And we guarantee that we're not taking anything away. We're simply adding new opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dudas. Councillor Brockington, I was going to call you Chair Brockington, but you're in transit. How's it going?
Oh, I'm well here. Thanks, Chair. Downtown Toronto. Look at my great view of that office tower behind me. Thank you to Director Gooding for the presentation today. This is a very important update for us, and certainly great work that she and her team are doing. Chair, I want to disclose, first of all, to our committee members that Director Gooding and I co-submitted a update about emergency preparedness to local newspapers earlier this calendar year. There were about, maybe the director can help me, maybe 25 or 30 contacts we have across the city. And I haven't followed how many have published it, but I know of 3 at least. And I want to thank the director for her good work in this regard. I think that preparing, first of all, making people aware of the importance of being prepared. It sounds basic, but critically important when an emergency hits. And that's my one and only question this morning, Chair, for the director, and that is, how can we work better with you to increase community resiliency, to increase community awareness, to increase the information that flows to the community? I do think some recent events that have hit our city has done that, but I do think there's a lot more that we can do to prepare the average Ottawa resident for an emergency, power outage, weather event. So I'd like to hear your thoughts, but also if there's something that can be worked on and provided to us after today, I'm very, very keen this term of council to make some inroads, in my ward at least, about getting people better prepared. And so I'd love to hear your thoughts at the community level, what we can do to work with you better. Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Chair. So it's a really it's a really important point, and what we're always trying to do is cast our net wide in terms of the vehicles through which we engage with people. And I think that there are 2 main categories of opportunities I wanted to highlight here. So in terms of our public engagement, it's really important to meet people where they are. Again, it's sort of that there's no one size fits all approach. Some people are very capable, especially those who have been through multiple emergencies and see the value in, having emergency plans and household emergency kits and so forth. Some people, due to other factors, are not. But at a minimum, we encourage people to at least know who to contact during an emergency, who to reach out for help, and how to reach out to them. And for those people who are at that more minimal level, what we're also doing by way of a second opportunity is really working with a variety of service providers who are already potentially supporting them. So for example, we have a very good relationship with Ottawa Community Housing, and we know that they have been over the past several years enhancing their own emergency preparedness work. I've mentioned the food bank and that network on many occasions. Our Community and Social Services Department has a variety of human needs partners, social services partners that are doing the same. And so basically, we're reaching out on multiple fronts, tailoring our messaging, repeating our messaging, and reaching as many partners as we can.
Thank you very much, Councillor Brockington. Vice Chair Devine.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Director Gooding and GM Ayot for this presentation. These are always some of the most top of mind conversations for myself and my team. I'm struck by one of the words I heard you use early in the presentation, which is the predictability of increased instability. And I think any emergency planner, the presence of instability is probably a scary concept. And if we know that we can predict increased instability, it behooves us to take a greater stance on being as prepared as we can for that instability. just a few things I want to zero in on. I very much appreciate, Beth, the ongoing work on building up those force multipliers. I know that one thing that we are continuing to look towards is that we have a well-prepared, well-organized chain of command, systems of communications from top all the way down to residents so that they know where their information will be coming from. So I'm certainly eager to continue that work with you. Just a few small little questions. You mentioned that this year, one of our priorities is turning the website ottawa.ca into a one-stop shop. Do we have a rough timeline for how that progression will happen? Because I imagine that's going to have to go through a few phases of design and testing. So do we have a rough timeline for when that one-stop shop emergency information thing will happen?
Thanks for the question, Mr. Chair. No, we, multiple departments and city services are working on this. I know it was discussed last week at the Environment and Climate Change Committee related to flood information. It's, you'll see this come up in the climate resiliency strategy. You'll see multiple players involved, and we're doing our best to work on it as fast as possible, but no firm timeline. Yeah.
Right. Well, I mean, because if we are putting importance on, and I agree, like other colleagues mentioned, whether it be electronic information through texts or a website, obviously we're going to want to have multiple channels whereby we can direct information. If, however, there is a priority on making the website a key information point, I think it would be good to put a goal in place and then to work backwards from that goal. I think that would be a great thing to do. Where'd it go? You mentioned earlier in your presentation that there may be federal opportunities for new resources tied to emergency management. Do you have any more information on what kind of, because I appreciate the fact, I will certainly appreciate the fact if the feds, because we talk many times around these tables about needing to look to higher levels of government for additional levels of funding. Are you saying that there is more of a conversation at the federal level of investing in climate resilience and emergency preparedness, and that there may be opportunities for municipalities to get that? And if so, do you have any more details on that?
Yes, thanks for the question, Mr. Chair. So the federal government is looking very seriously into the development of a humanitarian workforce. They have been consulting with different levels of government and in different cities. During their Ottawa-based consultation, I was invited to participate in the discussions. It's not, so they're writing a report, which will be released, I believe, in the fall of this year. And I don't think they have a clear vision other than that they are trying to consider what would be required to create a framework to enable across Canada a network of volunteers who are ready and able to respond, to prepare, respond, and recover from emergencies. And so it's hard for me to speak to what tangibly that means for the city, other than that it will most certainly result in an increase in the number of partnerships that may be available to us going forward.
Thank you. My last question is about the role that the city itself can play, the city and its resources can play in responding to any number of emergencies. And even from that slide you put up earlier about just the incidents we had in 2023, and then if you go back to 2017 and the incidents we've had from 2017, not only do we have a diverse array of incidents, we have a diverse scope of incidents, from very, very localized incidents that affect just one particular area in Barrhaven, for example, to citywide incidents. And quite often, when we have those larger, massive incidents, whether it be the derecho, perhaps, of 2022, or Convoy, those larger, heavy impact incidents, sometimes I think they put the greatest strain on the city in how to respond. And you and I have talked about what might be the criteria for states of emergency when the city declares states of emergency, and how the declaration of states of emergency might open up other tools, resources, avenues, options for the city. In recent years, it would seem like the derecho was on the larger scale of at least our weather-related disasters. That was a pretty citywide thing. I can't remember if you and I discussed this, but was the derecho, did that meet the criteria of state of emergency? And if not, what are the criteria for declarations of states of emergency?
Thank you. I'll start answering that question. Thank you, Chair. Great question. I think, when we look at states of emergency and how we respond to them, we have written into most of our bylaws now the authorities that allow us to proceed without declaring a state of emergency. So truly, the state of emergency doesn't provide us a lot of extra tools, but it does signal to the population that this is a very serious incident, and it may trigger the opportunity for the province to step in, and then if they declare a state of emergency as well, the federal government, which could provide additional resources. So generally, states of emergencies are great, but their primary purpose for Ottawa, and it's not the same for other municipalities across the province, it's a symbolic nature of declaring this is very, very serious. And, we're taking it seriously, and we're activating all of our resources. And we're also asking the province if they have additional resources that they could support. So there is a need for a state of emergency declaration in many instances. But if we have things under control and we feel confident that we can assure the residents that things are under control, then there's a discussion that has to take place at the senior level and with the mayor's office, because only the mayor can declare the state of emergency on, what that would look like. And we generally make recommendations to the mayor whether we should or not. But again, if it's politically symbolic, then that decision may be at the mayor's office, solely at the mayor's office.
So as I understand it, then there's a difference between, like, for example, when the city of Ottawa declares housing state of emergency or a climate state of emergency, that's different than declaring a state of emergency from a particular disaster event?
That's correct.
All right.
Yeah, most of those are just declared as a housing emergency and not a housing state of emergency.
Thank
A
you, sir.
state of emergency means the state we are in right now is an emergency, and we need to deal with it, in an emergency type setting. So I think there's some wording there that could be different.
And would the derecho not have met that state of emergency level?
I'll ask Beth to speak to that. I believe it does, but our response to it was relatively robust.
Great.
And
Then
we
I'm
had
good.
a lot of community. We had a lot of community resources, and we had an ability to respond. So we always sometimes fear the cry wolf effect as well. If you declare a state of emergency on absolutely everything you're dealing with, then someone may come back and ask you,
Absolutely.
is the city prepared for anything?
Good.
So we certainly want to try and use it to show the importance of the situation.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Vice Chair Devine. Councillor Kelly.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And thank you to GM Ayotte and Director Gooding for the presentation. There's some awesome information in there, and happy to hear a couple of things that you talked about, Director Gooding, particularly the use of new technology. And that's an area I wanted to explore with you, particularly given some of the comments from Councillor Dudas around internet access and such during emergencies. And I was really happy to hear the admission that the one size fits all approach doesn't always work, and that's, I think, true in many respects in the rural wards, is that there's different challenges and different needs, and one of those is connectivity. So one of the biggest challenges, as you know, Ms. Gooding, during last spring's flooding, the cell phone and internet access in rural areas is often reduced in quality on a good day. And sometimes during emergencies, as we've seen, the power is either already out because of an adverse weather event or needs to be cut off because of water surrounding homes and creating dangers for people. And when the power goes out, they hold back. It's my understanding that broadband, and a certain amount of that capability is reserved for emergency services. So our ability to connect and get good quality cell service and internet service is always reduced during those times, in a community that already struggles with connectivity. So, and I heard you talk about the use of new technologies, and I just wanted to see if there's been any thought or consideration given to, um, or if we know of the existence of technology that could potentially boost communications capability, internet access, and cell phone service in rural areas during emergencies. So, and I look out sometimes and I see construction companies setting up in the rural areas, setting up their work sites, and they've got companies that come out and set up various means to connect to the internet. And I was just wondering if there's anything like that that could be deployed through your department during an emergency in rural wards. Thank you.
Thank you. Great question, Councillor Kelly, and through you, Chair. Yeah, I've been personally involved in projects with the federal government and military and other local through some of the federal programs where we've been able to identify and develop an actual net, a standalone net type system. We're not in a position to actually deploy that right now, although the project was successful in identifying the proof of concept. This was a few years back. The reality is if we had a localized situation where we needed to look at that, I think that there is a possible source that we could access. It's just we need to do a lot of the legwork ahead of time to make that happen. We certainly appreciate the rural area has those difficulties. I'm very proud of the people who work in the rural area and of our rural constituents or your constituents and the citizens of Ottawa. Is they're very innovative, and they're very good at taking care of themselves for a period of time. And I would suggest that, you know, when we talk about a 72-hour plan, I know that a lot of our rural citizens have, you know, develop their 72-hour plan and are ready to actually survive. And they do that by the very nature of them being isolated to a certain degree from a lot of other resources. Also, we have great emergency services. Our volunteer firefighters are amazing. They're not only part of the community, they're also the citizens. So they see that value. So there's constant education out there to help people, you know, how can we move forward with the 72 hours and be prepared in the event that larger resources aren't able to come and help us. So technology wise, I think we still have some work to do to be able to set up a net specific to a geographic area to make sure. I believe the proof of concept is there. It's just a matter of developing the technology and being able to further that initiative. But I'll pass it on to Director Gooding if she has anything else to add.
Thanks for the question, Mr. Chair. So I just wanted to add, because that was very comprehensive and great. But I just wanted to add that we are seeing that 5G is going to eventually be a game changer, although I know the rollout is not comprehensive yet. But just to give you an example, during the last year's spring flooding, you're correct that we had some cell phone coverage issues in West Carleton, but about 6 months later, we sent staff from Recreation, Cultural, and Facility Services over to do some testing, and they found the results improved even within just a 6-month period, and that was just a direct result of 5G. So we're staying on top of it. We're looking at other technologies. I know that some emergency services in Canada are investing in satellite technology. So very happy, Councillor, to take this offline and follow up with you directly. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Kelly. Is that all your questions?
Yep, I'm done.
Thank you very much. Councillor Desroches.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thanks to staff for the delegation. And I'm pleased to see once again the commitment to working with volunteer groups and faith-based groups across the city when we have the need for help, especially at the local level where we just have limited capacity and are working on that capacity. And my view is the door should be open to these faith-based groups. In my experience, I've never seen them hand out a brochure. I've never seen them do any faith-based work. The work that they do has been solidly committed on helping people when they're in need. So pleased to see that underway. own experience as volunteer with St. John Ambulance, same perspective that they're there to help, and we should continue on that track to make sure that they're with us, and we have an open door for collaboration. I think given the situation we've had over the years, it's great to see that this branch is really starting to weigh in the decisions we make as an administration, as a city council. And I'm looking to see you weigh in more going forward. And there's going to be some difficult decisions where we have to pick a lane in terms of our priorities and the importance of emergency preparedness. So that may mean things like a reliable natural gas system, so that when the power is out, that people can still heat their homes in the wintertime. Or talk of banning gas-powered chainsaws. I'm not sure the time is now. These are equipment that our residents need and the public needs, especially in the rural area when they have down trees, to clean up and get the community back on its feet. And I have been advocating for a long time for Wi-Fi capacity at Fred Barrett Arena. Hundreds of people, thousands of people through that facility on a daily basis, and they can't figure out why we don't have Wi-Fi. So we've got a commitment in this year's budget to wire it and join the 21st century and have a reliable Wi-Fi system there, because that facility has served as a respite and refuge for folks when we have a problem in the area. So I'm going to be looking to you to weigh in on these and help be a disruptor in our organization to get these things going, because they do take time from time to time. And just lastly, I'm getting to a question, and I don't want to jinx it, but this time last year in the Finley Creek community, we had a power outage. I think on the Thursday, community was back on its feet, ready to open on Good Friday, but the Holiday Act prevented the grocery store, for example, and for several businesses from opening to serve the community who had been waiting patiently for the energy to be restored and waiting to get back into, fill their pantry of goods. And the store really didn't have the ability to open, first of all, to serve the community and reduce their losses. And there was no flexibility in the act that the mayor could sign some declaration that we would waive it under the circumstances, which I even think the unions would support that, because again, we're all at the table to serve our community when we're in need. So any progress on that, Chief? I know it's provincial, and I think it's going to take some work to align all our regulations and what have you. But that holiday opening is a real problem, like when communities are trying to get back on their feet. And I don't think it puts us in a good position to help a community get back on their feet when we've got a holiday closure. It's not something that I think helps us. Any progress on that, Chief?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I'll take that question. It's a really important point, and you're right that it is outside our immediate span of control, but we continue to use the means that are available to us, primarily advocacy through the province, to raise that issue directly. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I hope it doesn't happen again. We're getting into that phase again of the holiday season. Again, I hope we didn't jinx it, but there may be just situations where we may have to defy it and just stand behind the community, because again, it was a real barrier, I think, to the community getting got back on our feet and reducing the spoilage that should have gone out that door on the Friday and gotten into the hands of the community. So I'll just table that today again, and thanks for the opportunity to comment. Chair, that's it.
Thank you very much, Councillor Drosh. I appreciate very much the presentation. I do have a couple of questions myself. The first is with regard to insurance. And so when we're talking about having volunteer community organizations and faith-based groups coming out to be those boots on the ground and eyes and ears to be able to provide that force multiplication effect, how are we looking at the insurance component to that?
Thanks, Mr. Chair, for the question. So the insurance is an important criteria in terms of how we work with different types of volunteers. To go back to Councillor Devine's question, when we declare a state of emergency, a special labor law comes into effect that sort of designates all volunteers that work with the city as employees of the city who are basically covered by insurance. When we're not in a state of emergency, that coverage doesn't exist. And so what we are doing is tailoring our volunteer management protocol to reduce and manage that risk. And in a nutshell, like I said, that's actually the protocol that we're still finalizing. But in a nutshell, we're able to direct organizations with whom we have a formal agreement and who are insured to do work on behalf of the city. For entities that are not at that level of coverage, we can work with them, but not direct them. And so it's more of an information sharing and collaboration. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And I know this morning we have staff here from the Environment Climate Change team as well. And obviously a significant component of your conversation this morning was based directly on the impacts of climate change, extreme weather, and our city's resilience to that. And I guess I just want to speak to the alignment that we have between the different stovepipes in the city in terms of our policy, in terms of our progression of key policies, so that we're working hand in glove and well aligned, amongst emergency preparedness and environment as well. I don't know if you want to speak to that as well, Andrea, but I'll let you start, Beth.
Yeah, thanks for the question. It's a great one. I mean, we're always trying to reduce silos, streamline collaboration. And what we're finding is that the work that Andrea and her group are doing for the climate resiliency strategy is enabling further engagement and collaboration, because it's requiring us to come together more often at the table in a broad variety of ways outside the context of an emergency, to really plan and figure out how to best implement as a city. So it's enabling that one city approach. Yeah.
No, perfect. Thank you very much. And just, I guess it would be nice to, in due course, be able to see a bit more fidelity, I think, in terms of the timeline for implementation on the communication strategy and the Ottawa.ca components. I won't ask for that now because I don't know that you have all the answers on that, but I think as part of a routine update in the future, if we could see some fidelity to that, I think that would be appreciated.
Yes, Chair, thank you for that. We'll definitely have that as part of our annual report when it comes to presenting the annual report from an emergency management perspective.
Okay, thank you very much. I think Vice Chair, can you ask for that to be read into the minutes?
Receive the presentation from the Director of Public Safety Service, Emergency and Protective Services for information.
Is that carried?
Carried. Received.
Thank you. On to agenda item number 5, the Emergency and Protective Services Department, Ottawa Paramedic Service implementation of the Medical Priority Dispatch System.
Thank you, Chair. While Chief Poirier sets up, I just would like to say that, this has been a long time coming, and the city is extremely pleased with this change. And we're very happy that the province has agreed to move forward with this new system. And I think you'll see through the presentation that this will provide our residents who are in greatest need of immediate emergency care an ambulance. Whereas even today, we find ourselves at level zeros at times where that's not possible. And while we try to manage it based on the information we're receiving, this new system will dictate it. And those lesser emergency situations that aren't critical will take longer to respond to, but their chances of survival are much greater. So I think as Chief Poirier goes through the presentation, it'll be very clear on the differences. And this is a very welcome change and another good news story for the City of Ottawa. Thank you. Chief Poirier.
Good morning. And absolutely echoing General Manager Ayot's comments. April 10th is going to be a proud day for the Ottawa Paramedic Service, and I think it'll be something of true benefit to our community. Just the next slide, please. The new system is called the Medical Priority Dispatch System. En français, c'est le système de répartition des priorités médicales. C'est un protocole suivi par les répartiteurs pour évaluer la gravité de la maladie ou de la blessure de la personne au téléphone pour effectuer les ressources paramédicales qui sont requises. It replaces the current system called Dispatch Priority Card Index, DPCI. C'est un système qui est bien plus précis, plus exact et plus efficace que le système qu'on a en place aujourd'hui. Et l'autre affaire, le système, ça sert à notre communauté d'Ottawa, puis aussi les comtés de Prescott-Russell, puis de Stormont, Dundas, Glengarry et la ville d'Ottawa. This new system, in terms of replacing, there'll be a transition that happens on April 10th, and it should be seamless. We're preparing to ensure that it is such. La prochaine. The system is currently in place in several communities across Ontario. If we go back in the history, it was in 2000, 2001 that we asked for MPDS to be brought to the City of Ottawa. The reason it's taken so long is that the actual ability to have this system in place is at the discretion of the Ministry of Health and the province of Ontario. So at amalgamation, there was a request following a consultant report that said one of the best things that the City of Ottawa could do in 2001 would be to have MPDS in place to benefit our community. So 24 years later, 23 years later, I'm excited to say that it's happening and that the Ministry of Health has listened to us. It is currently considered absolutely the best practice. By no means do I say perfect, just that it is the best practice. It's used in over 45 countries. It's used in several communities in Ontario, and this is kind of the history. It's been in Toronto since 1992. In Niagara, they did a test. It was supposed to be a 5-year pilot. And at the end of 5 years, the ministry would make a decision on whether or not to implement it more broadly. I think it was in 2017 that the government at the time, the provincial government, said that we're going to accelerate the implementation of MPDS across the province. And it accelerated that in 2022. Mississauga received the software package. Kenora just received it, and Thunder Bay just earlier this year. There was a fair bit of negotiation to ensure that the City of Ottawa was next on the list, because initially we were still 3 or 4 years down the road. C'est très important aussi de reconnaître que c'est pas juste un protocole en anglais, c'est quelque chose que ça fait longtemps que c'est utilisé à Québec, puis Urgence Santé à la ville de Montréal, ça fait plusieurs années qu'ils ont MPDS en place. Next slide, please. So it is important to note that it is very much a protocol that determines the acuity of the illness or injury. And that really is kind of an imperfect science. But when you think about it, 45 countries serving 80 million people, and there's a whole review process that continues to refine what this protocol is. It also helps us determine which resources to send, which is a key element here. And the research on this protocol determines that there is a good linkage between what is said over the phone and when the paramedic arrives at the patient's side, that the actual determination that occurred over the phone aligns very well with what the patient sees. Once again, I'm not saying it's perfect, but it's much better, significantly better than the existing system. And the last piece is that the current system uses 2 protocols. This new system uses 5. In the provincial government wisdom, they decided to make it 5 colors that start with purple being the most severe and green being the less severe. Next slide, please. And so this is kind of the system here from purple down to green. And the old system, if we go to the next slide right away, shows this comparison or the benefits of this new system. That, really that it does do a good job of defining what is a high acuity call versus a low acuity call. The important piece there is that by doing a good recognition of these two, it allows us to ensure that we have resources or a better resource capability to get to the highest priority calls. Because when you think about this in the broader context, that paramedics and the service we provide the community is first and foremost to those whose lives are most in danger. Those individuals who may think that their injury is significant may not be such, and therefore we may not want to go to those calls immediately so that we can hold back a resource to make sure that we get to the unconscious, to the somebody in cardiac arrest, to those types of calls. It improves our ability to meet our response time targets, and I'll be talking more about that. And with respect to our term of council priorities for the city, take note that in the strategic objective number 7, it's important to note that one of the commitments from the city has been to improve our emergency response times. And this, I think, is a key element to assist in that goal. Next slide, please. This is an important slide when I spoke about the old system. When I see that DPCI, the old system, versus the new system, the old system gave high priority to 77%. And historically, that number really didn't change over a number of years. But that distorted or diminished our ability to get the highest priority calls. The new system is much more, has greater specificity, that only about 2% of the calls are purple. And those are the ones that I absolutely want our paramedics to get to. And this system has that ability to determine between what is a purple, a red, an orange, a yellow, or a green. So we're able to determine what our response will be and how we manage the sum of the calls much better. If you look back, and many of you may recall the Alice Martin coroner's jury, and at the sum of that jury recommended MPDS be implemented immediately, and that was 2005. But what had happened in that call that was so kind of disturbing was the fact that the response that the paramedic service had going to provide care to Alice Martin was diverted along the way to a call that appeared to be as severe but wasn't. So I'm not saying that it would have changed the outcome in that event, but it may have we may have been able to provide a better service in that scenario. And so the coroner's jury recommendation from 2005 has stayed with the paramedic service in terms of our real belief that having a better system evaluating calls is very, very important for us to provide the service that the community really truly expects from us. Next slide, please. So, like all systems, when you change, there is things that'll have impacts. One of the impacts that we're learning from the other implementations across the province and other services is the fact that the caller for 911 will be asked more detailed questions, which we have to make sure that we let our community know that this is going to happen. If any of you have ever called 911, one of the things they always ask for is, what is the address? What is your phone number? And if you don't provide that bit of information, it makes it very difficult for us to respond. But if you're in a panic situation, it's one of those ones that, well, why you keep asking me that? The new system is going to ask more questions so that we can be better at the other end to make sure that the right resource goes and has the right priority. So key elements are that if someone phones 911 and says, my spouse, my family member is not breathing, we will be dispatching immediately. That will not necessarily improve, but will be a principal tenet of this new system. The important piece for us to communicate back to the community is that non-life-threatening calls may wait longer. And that is going to be our challenge, to speak to the community, to let them know that this may occur because we're holding a resource so that we can get to that 911 call where somebody has said somebody's in cardiac arrest. Now, a key element of that will also be that when people wait, we are going to follow up and make follow-up calls to say, how are you doing? Has anything changed? And if things have changed, we'll reprioritize and go back through the process. But the key element here is for us to manage our resources better as we go forward to get to the most important calls on a regular basis with a high degree of reliability. And this system helps us get there. Next slide. So how did we get here? I think the announcement was April last year that the Ministry of Health announced that they'd be changing over to system here in Ottawa. We've been working furiously, and I stand here in recognition of the team that is putting this together. 100 hours of training for every communication officer. They are now being certified as emergency medical dispatchers through this organization called the International Academy of Emergency Dispatchers. They have a new requirement for continuing education, and there's a whole system of quality control that goes with this new process, which is rather rigorous, but will really, and I'll come to it, has a real true benefit for us on a go-forward basis. Next slide, please. So I've talked about the April 10th date. We're preparing for a transition. We're bringing in additional staff. We're taking care of a number of elements to make sure that this transition is seamless to the public and there's no effect. It's important for me to mention that our response time performance plan will be updated as this, and I'll come back to you, to committee, to have another discussion about what our performance standards should be. We currently have performance standards that I report on to our annual report. And as you would note, last year, we were not successful on the most important ones, sudden cardiac arrest, and our highest levels of acuity. Quite honestly, the Ottawa Paramedic Service did not do well. This should help us do better by managing our resources in a more appropriate manner. So that'll hopefully be in June. We'll be bringing that report forward. And what it is specifically is that for different classes of patients, how long will it take us to get there? And how reliable is that service of us getting there? So more to come on that. And then the last piece I think is quite fascinating, or I'm excited about as well, is the fact that we will be doing performance reviews with the intent to get to this thing called ACE accreditation, which is the Accredited Center of Excellence. And if we achieve that, and I expect we will, within a year, that'll permit us to look at other options within the dispatch center, our communication center, to manage calls once again, even in a more broad level. And what I mean by that is to do a secondary triage. There are places in the world where you phone in, they assess your call, and they say, here, maybe you should speak with this individual who can provide you with pathways of how we can deal with your complaint or with your injury without having to send a paramedic. But that's a year down the road. But we will get there. The whole idea of secondary triage is still providing a safe service, the appropriate service to our community, but once again, being able to manage our resources level so that we're always saving ourselves and being able to provide that immediate service to those who have life-threatening injuries. Next slide, please. Oh, I think that was the last slide. My apologies. Excited for April 10th. Thank you. Merci.
Thank you very much, Chief. Vice Chair Devine.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to generally convey my admiration and appreciation for this. And generally, this committee over the past several months, whether it be the use of care, I can't remember the term, but the use of care bylaw, the use of lawn care and how we adapted that bylaw and the general bylaw workforce plan, the fantastic innovations we heard from fire services at the last meeting, my ongoing appreciation for Director of Emergency Management, and here today from you, Chief, and also what we heard at, several months ago about the use of taxis for ambulatory services. I'm just really consistently grateful for the innovation that you are demonstrating on how to best marshal our resources at a time when our resources are always challenged and the crisis is increasing. And you promised because I remember last year we had the report from you where you laid out just what are the risks with level 0, and you promised innovation as a partial solution to that while we wait for Ontario to help us out. Wait and wait and wait. And you promised innovation, and you delivered with that the use of taxi cabs last time, and now here from DPCI to MPDS. So thank you very much for that. So yes, I have some questions. Can we predict, I assume, that there will be a significant decrease in level 0 states, at least for purple and red codes under MPDS?
I hesitate because I'm thinking it through. I don't know that we can predict that piece. We're combining two different concepts here. Level 0s is about having the service having resources available for that next call for service. And what this system does is prioritizes which calls, the severity of the call.
Then allow me to rephrase the question. If level 0 means when someone calls, we cannot provide an ambulance to them at that time, under this new system for purple and red, our highest codes, can I assume that those phone calls will not be told, we do not have an ambulance for you less frequently?
That is true.
That's good.
Maybe I could add, if you don't mind.
Of course,
I think
please.
that, it's all dependent on our offload delays at the hospitals. If the hospitals don't improve on their offload delays, all of our ambulances may be at the hospital, and therefore this will not help.
Of course, and that is, but at least here, the city is doing what it can to how do we best manage and mitigate and modify and adapt when faced with problems, challenges outside our control, unless we write another letter. However, you did mention that one thing, as I understand it, one element to this new MPDS system is that we have to a certain extent, hold back on resources in anticipation of that next purple or red call. And that's an interesting concept, but I can understand it. So we won't just be sending out on a first come, first serve basis. We will be holding back on resources, just like you keep the table open at the fancy restaurant in case the VIP comes in. But are there criteria for how long we might hold a resource in check? Can we predict how many purple and reds we're going to get on a call on a night? And so we're not holding back an ambulance longer than we have to. Will there be, or is that a judgment call?
That is the reason I'll be bringing forward the response time performance plan to actually have more of that discussion with committee and council in our community, because that holdback is an important piece that if it's 30 minutes, maybe our community is good with that on something that may be, somebody with a broken finger. But if it's 4 hours, that may not be appropriate. So that's why I think there's more dialogue to be had specifically on those kinds of issues. And it is sensitive because when somebody calls 911, it is an emergency for that individual. We have people, our communications officers, who evaluate what in some ways I'll say a true level of severity it is, but it still goes back that the original caller believes it's an emergency. So we have to manage the expectation on that. But as a community, we also have to have a shared understanding of what is appropriate. And I think that really is an important element in how this goes forward over time, that yes, people can wait, but it can't be indeterminate.
Of course.
We will have the follow-up, the check-in to make sure that people are still safe. But there's a community expectation that we have to be clear about and talk to the community about.
That kind of segues a little bit into my next question. So I can clearly understand how my partner, my spouse can't breathe is purple, whereas, you know, I stubbed my toe is green. I can understand that. And how I can understand how a communications officer might make the distinction. Does acuity of pain, whether or not it's tied to an actual injury, if someone stubbed their toe, but they describe acuity of pain as 11 out of 10, does acuity of pain translate into elevated priority?
Generally, no.
And thank you. I think that's, I don't want to say it loud, but that's reasonable, but I understand that. I can now understand that communicating this to the community, communicating this new system, i.e. you may have to wait longer because we prioritize others. I can understand that that's an important communications tool, but a sensitive communications tool. How, and we have to assume that our potential customers is everyone citywide. Can you tell me a little bit more about that communications plan and what's the approach to letting residents know you may have to wait, but for good reason?
Yeah, thank you for that, Chair and Councillor. We're actually working with Public Information Media Relations here in the city to work on, as of today, to start our communications to the public, recognizing first that we talked to our committee. So we're preparing specific videos for the public, but as also kind of a force multiplier, we're preparing communication elements for the Ottawa Paramedic Service, Ottawa Police Service, long-term care homes, retirement homes, because in many respects, all of my partners within the city and in the broader healthcare community will be impacted by this as well. So that's a big part of the communications plan, because we know in many respects who's going to be attending these events. And there's work to do in terms of myself speaking publicly about it. Today is the first day. And we'll be also using the other social media accounts to get the message out.
Thank you. Just two more small questions. At a recent meeting, we talked about the change where we now will be deploying and employing taxis for certain calls. Can I assume that that dispatch of taxis will be for the lower echelon codes, or might they be employed no matter where?
Absolutely. It's only for the individuals that are the lowest acuity calls.
Great. Last question. So you mentioned that each communications officer will get 100 hours of additional training. Fantastic. Has that additional budget pressure already been factored in? And secondary to that, once those communications officers have that new level of training, do they themselves fall into a different, will there be promotions and or additional salary pressures from them having been more trained?
Chair and Councillor, last fall, we made a business case application to the Ministry of Health. They provided us with another $2.7 million for HR. So we're in the process now of hiring 17 additional staff specifically to manage this new system, and also to manage the QA processes, quality assurance processes. So, quite honestly, as much as, it sounds like I've complained about the Ministry of Health in terms of the timeline to get here, they've been a very good partner as we move forward into the implementation phase. So we have new staff, we're hiring more staff. And the last piece in terms of payment is also, I have to give credit to the Ministry of Health. Our communications officers are extremely well prepared, well trained, even before getting this additional training. And unfortunately, we've been the recruitment pool for a lot of peer agencies, be it the Ottawa Fire Services, Ottawa Police Services, other services that have dispatch components. We've been losing staff, and primarily, in many respects, due to the pay differential, which has been significant. Once again, we made application last fall, and the Ministry of Health has provided additional funds to support that. And we went through a market adjustment within the city to bump up the compensation rate for our communications officers, so that we will not have the same recruitment issues that we've had previously. And that's been a very positive step. So we've had additional staff, additional funds from the province, and a market adjustment that has been very, very positive been well received in our communications center.
Great. Thank you very much, Chief. Very happy with this. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice. Councillor Dudas.
Yes, thank you very much. My question about communications and how you're going to share this information with the public outside of them calling in and receiving it from a dispatcher has been answered. So thank you for that. I'll just quickly, when it comes to new systems, new technology, I am always a fan of having another jurisdiction try it out first, go through the growing pains, and then us adopt a robust system. I just have to point out the ridiculousness of the length of time it has taken us to get to this point, and how pleased I am that we're finally here, like over 20 years. My eldest daughter's 24. I mean, it's been her whole lifetime for you to try to have this adopted within our municipality. So I won't belabor the point. It's unfortunate that it's taken this long, but I am so pleased to see that we are on the cusp of launching this. And I would say too that, once again, there will be some change management with the community to know that what to expect. But I also hope that this will mean that our highly trained, incredible paramedics, our dispatch teams, all the folks on the front line will be able to do what they do best, which is actually deal with those high priority, life-threatening circumstances, and then obviously get to those other ones too, but that there'll be more of a focus on what they're supposed to be there for, and making sure that we're saving lives. So I don't have a question in that because my question was asked and it was answered very well. But I just wanted to say that it's taken us a long time. I see how you're smiling throughout the entire presentation. I think it's well earned. And to the entire team that's been doing the negotiations behind the scene to get us here, I very much appreciate it. I'm looking forward to seeing how this improves our system.
Thank you very much, Dudas. And just in time, Councillor Plante.
Oui, merci beaucoup. Il fallait que je cherche mon café. So I was just wondering, how does this align with the new 911 system that's set to be implemented, I believe, in the next coming months?
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Councillor. The 911 system is separate and distinct. So this is how, I'll say in the simplest terms, that this is a computer system that manages the call information we receive. The 911 system is the telephony that answers the calls and basically brings the call to us. There is no direct implication between the two. And if anything, this system, based on the fact that it's so widely used, not just here now in the province of Ontario, but across the country, will line up well with the new telephony that we're talking about in terms of 911. And I look forward to that.
And just to follow up, in the color scheme you showed, where would an overdose fall on that scheme?
Depending on how the overdose presents. So if it's an individual who is unconscious, unresponsive, that'd be a purple. If it's an overdose that somebody is conscious, alert, aware of their surroundings, but's having anxiety, all those other parts, and depending on the level of responsiveness, it may be a red or an orange.
Thank you very much, Councillor Plante. After the presentation and questions to staff, the recommendation is that the Emergency and Protective Services Committee recommend Council receive this report for information. Is this item received? Thank you very much. We have no in-camera items today. Item 7, information previously distributed. 7.1, we have the use of delegated authority in 2023 by Emergency and Protective Services included separately. Item 8, motions for which notice has been previously given. We have 8.1, a motion from Councillor Plante, problematic properties webpage. I will pass this over to Councillor Plante.
Oui, merci. Vous allez m'excuser la question. Am I just reading it now or can I ask my questions now?
You can read it in and then we'll, did you read the whole thing in last time or has it changed it significantly? Okay, if you want to refresh the resolution and then we'll go with questions.
Merci. Whereas there's been an increase in the number of problematic occupied or unoccupied properties in Ottawa, and whereas these properties generate frequent complaints and safety concerns which negatively impact the surrounding communities, which vacant property, property standards, property maintenance violations, waste, debris, pests, and other nuisances. And whereas the City of Edmonton developed a problematic properties webpage to help residents navigate these types of complaints and concerns, and Ottawa residents could also benefit from access to similar information. Therefore, be it resolved that staff explore the feasibility of creating a problematic property page on the City of Ottawa website, which includes the definition of what is and isn't a problematic property, a link to 311 and other resources, a flow chart to assist communities, and a list of departments involved in a problematic property.
Thank you very much. So we have a few delegations on this topic. We'll go to them before questions to staff. Is Gerald Sabin, the Secretary from Action Sandy Hill, is he either here or online?
Hello, sorry, I'm here.
Perfect. Mr. Sabin, you have 5 minutes. Carry on.
Great, thank you. Thank you for having me. My name is Jerry Sabin, and I'm representing today Action Sandy Hill. I'm speaking in support of Councillor Plante's motion asking city staff to consider the development of a definition for problematic properties and creating a toolkit to educate residents and property owners. And I'd like to leave you with 3 points to consider. First, this motion is an important first step towards adopting a proactive approach to problematic properties. This motion provides the opportunity to educate residents and property owners about their responsibilities and what resources or consequences exist when those responsibilities are neglected. And finally, this motion says something important about the care that residents and the city demonstrate towards our urban communities. Before continuing, I'd like to tell you a little bit. I have a slide that should be up about a little bit about the properties that you can see on my slide. These are 302 to 306 Besserer Street. They sit at the corner of Besserer and Nelson, which is an important pedestrian gateway into Sandy Hill and is visible from Rideau Street. This property has been unoccupied since at least 2022 and has had several fires. It has also been the site of continual calls to bylaw, fire, police, and ambulance services. It took over a year for the property owner to take adequate measures to protect this property and a Herculean push by residents, the city, and our councillor to just get a fence installed. To me, looking at this property and the length of time it has remained in this state is an excellent illustration of the need for this motion. Adopting this motion is also an important step towards proactive engagement with existing or potential problematic properties. By identifying problematic properties, the city can intervene before major incidents. A fire last month in Sandy Hill saw at least 2 firefighters fall through the floor while responding to a fire caused by arson. In the case of 302 to 306 Besserer, each time individuals have gained access to the property and set fires, first responders have had to enter and search these premises. This, of course, is their duty, but as a city, we have a responsibility to them to prevent, where possible, the need for our first responders to put themselves in harm's way. In other parts of Sandy Hill, we can also see large institutions making changes in our neighborhood that may lead to a rise in problematic properties. The University of Ottawa will not be renewing leases for 2 cooperatives on Henderson Avenue, and by 2028, 3 city blocks from Laurier to Templeton will be largely unoccupied. A proactive approach by the city in this case is essential. The investment environment can change, as we've seen with interest rates in the recent past, and it can take a long time to line up funding agreements or permits to begin construction on new projects. If we know that properties, or in the near future in our neighborhood, whole city blocks, will be sitting empty for extended periods of time, we can intervene early and prevent another situation like we see on Besserer. This is important because such properties give the impression that people do not care about our neighborhood. Sandy Hill is a dynamic urban community, home to important educational institutions, families, businesses, and many young people starting off their adult lives in Ottawa. By failing to address properties like the one on Besserer, we leave visitors and residents in other parts of Ottawa with the idea that Sandy Hill is unsafe, unloved, and a dumping ground for the city's problems. Let's shift the burden of problematic properties from nearby residents, businesses, and first responders, and onto those who are responsible for them, property owners who fail to secure and maintain their properties. This motion is one step towards showing the pride we all share in our urban neighborhoods and what they contribute to the fabric of our city. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sabin. You have a number of questions. Councillor Desroches.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. First of all, great delegation. Probably, I'll put that in the best of clips for the year. Very constructive, very thoughtful, very respectful in the tone, and I really appreciate that in this day and age that we live in. And the books behind you add to the cred, of course. A couple questions for you. I'm open-minded to this, but I guess two things. One, so you'll have something on a website. It'll be Ontario 246-897. So the corporate veils of some of these companies really doesn't have probably the desired effect. So that's one question. Second is, well intended. How do we prevent harassment of landlords? We live in an age as well where I've heard from election donors saying, I don't want to donate anymore. My name goes on a website, and then the next thing you know, I'm harassed by this political group or that for a legitimate legal contribution to a political campaign. And I'm just not interested in getting engaged because of this really horrible byproduct that can come from likely a minority of people. So first, the corporate veil question. Secondly, on well-intended transparency or naming and shaming, essentially, but leading to harassment bordering on potentially sort of criminal activity. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I think we're dealing at this stage, I think, with the first step in the policy process, which is problem definition. We need to be able to define the problem before the city is able to take action. And I appreciate that there are going to be implementation issues around identifying property owners who's ultimately responsible recouping the costs of dealing with problematic properties. And in the design of any eventual policy that flows from this definitional exercise, we'll also have to be careful, or I would hope the city would be careful about using a data-driven approach to be able to determine that definition. So this wouldn't be, I'm a university professor. I work with young people all the time. I don't want to see the young students of Sandy Hill, finding themselves on the wrong side of a problematic property definition when, other measures can be taken to engage them. But we're not really talking about the occasional keg party, right? We're talking about properties like the one on Besserer that are in complete disrepair, that are the site of criminality, social dysfunction, that attract those things to the neighborhood. And that also, and I don't have those numbers, I'm not privy to them, but I know the city must know how much they've spent of ratepayers' money dealing with the problems related to those properties. And I think that ultimately the burden has to be shifted from the psychic cost to neighbors and residents, and of course first responders, to those who are actually causing the problem, which are the individuals or the numbered companies or the investors who are failing to live up to the responsibilities of property ownership.
Okay, thank you for the answer. That's all, Chair.
Thank
you. Thank you very much, Councillor Desroches. Councillor Plante.
Thank you so much, Jerry. I'm going to make a joke that's actually my books in the background, but it's absolutely not. So I just wanted to quickly ask you, because one of the ways, and I think we've talked about this before, this came about for me, is because one of the calls I got when I first got elected was a single mom who couldn't send her child to school because they had so many cockroaches in her unit, which she was trying to deal with, and had multiple failed attempts to reach out to her landlord. The school didn't want the child to come in because they had found one in her backpack. And so I just wanted is there maybe a social justice lens we can apply to problematic addresses? You touched on it a bit with the students, but what would be, in your view, that lens we could apply here?
Well, I mean, I think, ultimately, we, the city does a lot of regulating, and it can't be inconsistent, or it ought not to be inconsistent in the level of regulation that it undertakes. And I think in some of our urban neighborhoods, there's the impression that if a certain set of behaviors or a certain property falls, to a certain level of dysfunction, all of a sudden there's nothing that can be done, right? And yet, if you park an hour and 5 minutes on Besserer, you're going to get a ticket from bylaw. So there's heavy enforcement on more minor infractions within the neighborhood. So anyway, that's at the extreme end. At this sort of maintaining livable standards for individuals who are economically marginalized, who are important members of the community and add to the richness of the fabric of Sandy Hill and other parts of Ward 12, absolutely providing them and those who advocate for them with additional tools to be able to ensure that those units, those properties remain livable is very important. So there definitely is a social justice lens to this, and absolutely, I hope that I mean, I'm dealing in Sandy Hill more often with properties that have a lot of value in the land underneath them and less so in the construction above. But certainly in Lowertown, Vanier, and other urban neighborhoods that are adjacent to Sandy Hill, the issue that you're describing is also very important.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much for the delegation, Jerry. Next, we have up Mr. Chris Greenshields, the president of the Vanier Community Association.
Thank you, Chair, for this opportunity to address this motion on behalf of the Vanier Community Association and to confirm our support for it. The issues related to problematic addresses in Vanier are long-standing. We maintain a long list of such addresses, and over the years, many of them never seem to go away, despite efforts by the range of city actors. Vanier is a neighborhood of about 18,000 residents, where renters represent 70% of the population. VCA has a safety committee to address community safety issues, and problematic addresses are a key concern. Residents are discouraged by the lack of progress by the city to address the issues. Despite the efforts of the OPS's neighborhood resource teams, which periodically accompany community members to visit and discuss individual addresses, progress seems to be slow in the absence of a concerted plan. Absentee landlords who do not maintain properties and indeed are often hard to reach is a common problem, and action by bylaw officers is often limited despite citations and fines. Long-standing derelict houses are targets for arson and contribute to the arson waves that strike Vanier periodically. The cycle continues with burnt-out buildings remaining for long periods despite calls for demolition. The continued presence of problematic addresses is cited in the work around the city's community safety well-being plan. Problematic addresses increase community anxiety and affect overall mental health and sense of safety. Strategizing to address problematic addresses is not new. In 2011, Crime Prevention Ottawa released a study on the issue. That's more than 10 years ago, and the previous item, this kind of delay was cited. In that case, as a result of the province. In the 2011 study, it included a scan of what other cities in Canada are doing and highlighting examples for action to be considered. Symposia such as Community Solutions, Beautification Today for a Safer Tomorrow, again under Crime Prevention Ottawa, covered the issue in 2013 and its impact on community well-being. Efforts in this area seem to have waned, and the recent merger of Crime Prevention Ottawa with the Community Safety and Wellbeing Program represents a new opportunity to seize the issues. This motion put forward by our councillor focuses on what the City of Edmonton launched in 2020, Problem Property Initiative, with its comprehensive website, a plan for 2023-26 to better coordinate increasing efforts, and periodic bulletins to engage the community. One excerpt of a recent bulletin seems to resonate with concerns in Vanier. Its headline, Problem Property Demolitions Improve Community Safety and Vibrancy. It quotes a municipal enforcement officer, a member of the Problem Properties team, which is dedicated primarily to the neighborhoods most affected by problem properties. And I quote, neglected vacant buildings are much more than eyesores in Edmonton neighborhoods. They can be a serious public health risk and a burden on emergency services. They can also attract criminal activity. According to the Edmonton Fire Rescue Services, fires in unsecured vacant properties are a leading risk to the safety of firefighters and the community at large. Motion before you is a small step and overdue to respond to calls for a coordinated approach that engages community members. I encourage you to recommend this action to City Council. Thank you. Merci.
Thank you very much, Mr. Greenshields. Councillor Plante.
Bonjour Chris, comment ça va?
Très bien.
J'avais juste une question pour toi. So I won't give out the address, but we have a property that's near the Pauline Charon Community Center, which I'm sure you know very well. How do you think this kind of motion would prevent that kind of situation either now or in the future?
Well, it is not a replacement for ongoing action, whether by the community resource teams, the OPS, or by bylaw. But as we've found in repeated cases, bylaw in particular seem to have serious problems in talking about problematic addresses in enforcement. And this property is a case in point. And this property has been not only risked in terms of its use, but it's right across from a seniors center. And it has situations where dogs have attacked the neighbors. And the city is totally unable, other than, and we noticed this on our walk by, to put on the front porch a notice, but it never changed. So that particular example, I can give you another example, again, a burnt out property, another fire. The fire department came in, the bylaw boarded up the property. It's owned by a distant landlord. The best that the city could do in this case was to file a violation of the vacant unit. That was the only enforcement that they felt they could do under the circumstances. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Councillor Plante. Next, we have Cheryl Perrott from the Hintonburg Community Association.
Good morning, Chair and Councillors. Sorry, it took me a minute to get my video on. So I'm from the Hintonburg Community Association, and we completely support Councillor Plante's motion, and we urge you to pass it. I'm sure several of you may have problem properties in your wards and understand the incredible amount of work and time that residents, city staff, and your own staff put into trying to manage these properties. And once one issue is somewhat fixed, then it's on to another issue, and so on year after year. We are all managing them for the owners who take little to no responsibility, and all the problems and costs are borne by us. So if you could put up slide 1, please. These are just a very, very few of the Hittenberg properties that we have. Let me just get back to where my notes are here. Okay, so this slide is the tenants in this building were evicted in January and February of 2023, so a year ago. Some were good tenants, some were not. Subsequently, regular break-ins happened. And the one on the right ended up being completely full of syringes. It was a 6-unit building. The buildings were demolished at the end of July 2023. And now the empty fenced lot has weeds and dumped trash that the owner refuses to deal with. Next slide, please. So this one was like this for 2 years. It's now being redeveloped, but despite calling the owner, emailing, nothing ever happened to clean it up. Next slide, please. This property's been vacant for at least 2 years, probably longer. It's been flipped twice, and it's now up for sale again. It's been broken into at least once. Next slide. This property's been a huge problem for over 20 years. With several different owners over that period of time. It's now been vacant for at least 2 years. There's been drug problems, violence, overdose deaths, several break-ins. And this is one of the properties you see when they do articles on the vacant unit tax. It's one of the ones they usually profile. And next slide, please. So this one's been vacant for 6 to 8 years. There's been break-ins, syringes around encampments in the rear yard. And there's another property that I didn't put on a slide that's been vacant for a couple of years. And my understanding is bylaw had to contract out various property maintenance issues 3 times in 2023 for non-compliance by the owner. Subsequently, the property looked like hell the majority of last year, and it cost the rest of us lots of time and money. Non-compliance seems to be a growing trend where landlords just don't respond to bylaw and just don't do anything. And it takes quite a while to get this contracted out. So this proposed website would be just the first step in helping neighbors figure out where to start in identifying problem properties to the city and which departments can help, because many residents don't know. The next step is creating a better process for dealing with these issues by having an adequately resourced and dedicated multi-department team to work on these properties. Regular bylaw staff do not have the time for this. I hope the recommendations like this will be identified in the staff report that comes from this motion. The amount of city and community resources spent on these properties needs to be billed back to the negligent owners. Edmonton has recently created a new higher property tax subclass for these problem properties that tries to recoup some of the cost all taxpayers have been paying, trying in vain to try to manage these properties. Ottawa needs to look at this as a further step. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your delegation. Councillor Plant.
Oh, you're muted.
Sorry. Yeah, sorry about that. I had the button on. Sorry. You finished off by talking about the city of Edmonton. And one of the things that I was struck by was how the province is at the table with them in their meetings about this issue. And I was just wondering if you could touch upon that, why it's important for the province to kind of hear these concerns as well alongside the municipalities when trying to deal with them.
Absolutely. We keep being told that that bylaw can only do so much because there are certain timelines that they have to abide by. And it's just such a very long process to put in a complaint, have an inspector go out. They have to give them sometimes a month. In one case where we have a broken window in beginning of January, They had to give them till the end of February to fix it. It's still not fixed, so they've gone through the winter with a broken window. But we need the province to provide whatever legislation is required to try to speed this up and to be able to put the onus of the work and the costs onto the owners.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next delegate will be Mr. Bruce McConville. Okay, we'll move on, and if Bruce comes on afterwards, we'll cycle back. So, Mr. John Dickey, the chair of the Eastern Ontario Landlord Organization.
Yes, good afternoon. I hope everyone can hear me.
Yes, loud and clear, Mr. Dickey. You have 5 minutes.
Good, thank you very much. So I find myself in a very interesting position because I joined this meeting in order to support the motion. I continue to support the motion. However, I want to bring you quite a different perspective than the perspective that has been presented to you by the last 4 speakers, although there are elements of what they say that I agree with. And the main point I would make, however, is that in the wards from which the speakers come, there is a prohibition on the demolition of properties unless there is a building permit in hand for the construction of a new property. And to me, that is the proximate cause of a significant part of the problem that everyone is dealing with here. Because as was pointed out by the professor who led off, it can take a long time to get development approvals. Financing conditions can change, development conditions can change. It can take a long time to redevelop a property. And for the most part, a developer would be perfectly happy to demolish a property and then to have a clear site, plant grass seed, even fence it if that's wanted. And then there could be no question of the property being vandalized, other than the odd pop bottle being thrown into it, but certainly not occupied, not set on fire, none of the 90% of the problems would not happen. But it is the city rule banning demolition until a building permit is in hand that effectively stops that from being done. So with all respect, I think I'm perfectly fine with this motion proceeding with subject to their workload with the city staff examining this option. But I think a good hard look should be had at the effect of that bylaw prohibiting demolition and the effect that it has in this situation. My understanding of the purpose of that bylaw is to avoid gaps in the street frontage. Well, fine and dandy if we could avoid gaps in the street frontage and at the same time not have these eyesores, not have these fire traps that attract vandals and attract people who are homeless who break in, then we could avoid both. But the problem is we cannot avoid both. And so which is better to avoid? A gap in the street frontage or to avoid everything that people are complaining about today? So that's my main point to you, that I think there is a different and more effective solution to 90% of the problem that's being put forward. So that's that. Then when it comes to the question of properties, again, I'm always a bit uncomfortable because, of course, I don't like looking at these unsightly properties either. On the other hand, I could go around the city. I could take photographs of thousands of perfectly attractive rental properties, hundreds of rental properties awaiting development, and I could place them in front of you and say, listen, there isn't a problem. And, but I'm not going to waste your time doing that. You drive around the city. You all know that these are isolated problems. And that means, yes, we should deal with them, but we have to deal with them intelligently. And we should get at the root of the problem, which I would suggest to you is this ban, this demolition control in these inner urban areas. So again, I think I can stop there. I'm not sure if Councillor Plant expected me to be saying that or not to be saying that, although I think we have this discussion fairly often. So I'll hush up and give back my 40 seconds remaining to the committee and to Councillor Plant.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dickey, and I'll give those 40 seconds over to Councillor Plant.
Thank you so much, John. I just wanted to thank you too for your work with our town and gown committee that we have in the area. I was, I've been talking to other council colleagues who have colleges and universities in their area and they don't have a town and gown, and frankly, they should. So thank you for your work on that committee. Second of all, I just wanted, because I know you've worked on this piece a lot, can you talk a bit about the provincial responsibility here? That the same question I asked Cheryl.
Thank you very much. I'd love to do that. And I worked actually with Cheryl and her group 12 odd years ago when Yasser Naqvi was the MPP for Ottawa Centre. And the big thing, this is a specific thing we tried to get the province of Ontario to do. We tried to get them to create what is called a SCAN program. Safer Communities and something or others. Yeah, probably Safer Communities and Neighborhoods program. They have them in the Western provinces. And what they enable is they help neighbors and, frankly, property owners deal with serious criminal activity on a property. Because it's all very well to say, well, the Landlord and Tenant Act, the Residential Tenancies Act permits a landlord to evict someone for crimes, committing illegal activity at the property. But you have to prove the crime. So the neighbor who sees the drug dealing going on or the prostitution or the illegal alcohol or whatever has to go to the owner and say, look, I'm seeing all this stuff. And then the owner gives a notice of termination. And if the wrongdoer stays put, then the owner needs to bring this person as a witness to the Landlord and Tenant Board. And it's scary. The witnesses don't want to be, made to testify. It's ugliness. I'd be afraid to do it. You can be dealing with criminal gangs. So SCAN circumvents that because SCAN has a provincial body staffed usually by former police officers. They collect the evidence. They usually do it by undercover surveillance. And then there's an application made to Superior Court, which shuts the property down. And the application is made against the landlord. There may be notice posted on the building, but the landlord breathes a sigh of relief. Thank God those gangsters are out of my property, and then they can rent it to somebody who's clean and legitimate. So, that's just one area in which what the province's rules are and the regulations are so important. But EOLA was completely behind the community organizations seeking to have the province bring in the SCAN organization, which, as I say, I believe I know it's in 3 of the 4 Western provinces. I think it's in all 4, but maybe only 3. And I think it's in 2 of the provinces in Atlantic Canada. So that and all kinds of other help from the province would be of assistance.
Yeah, thanks, John. Just so you know, I have been speaking with Lucide Caillard, who's our MPP, about it, so I'll bring you in on some of those discussions. Thank you so much.
All right, happy to talk. Josh and I are not quite as close as Yasser and I were, but perhaps you can make us closer.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dickey and Councillor Plant for that. I think we might have Bruce McConville on the line now. So if we do, Bruce, you can pipe up. You've got your 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the committee and Stephanie for putting this motion on the table. It's important for the city to have a definition of what is and what isn't a problematic property. We must realize that the very existence of problematic addresses is an ongoing emergency in Ottawa. Providing an effective channel to engage our residents in solving this horrific problem will result in public awareness, their support through active participation, and increase well-being in our neighborhoods. Do consider this in terms of being a constant emergency, needing priority attention due to its acuity and a major threat to public security. I would consider this pretty much a purple coat, as we've seen on the slides. Passing this motion will set the groundwork for future work on ensuring the safety and security of residents living near these derelict and dangerous properties. Permitting such public engagement will propel remedial action and inform a central bureau of the importance of this degenerative problem and encourage political involvement. My own experience with problematic properties is extensive. I have put myself at personal risk in witnessing and dealing with issues such as child prostitution, incessant drug trafficking, overdose, used needles and broken glass paraphernalia, excrement, etc. I and neighbors and guests have been verbally threatened with death. My property has been broken into, and there are constant attempts, all which seem to emanate from a problematic address in my neighborhood. Last fall, I had to apprehend and escort an opioid user on my balcony who was trying to break into my apartment. No police or emergency response was permitted other than filing a complaint online. I and 2 others were attacked and severely mauled by a vicious dog involving hospitalization. Again, bylaw, police, Department of Health were unable to respond by removing the dog. Theft and break-ins are on the increase as drug traffickers at problem addresses also act as fences for stolen goods from the surrounding community. What we call the backpack boys on bikes with balaclavas are omnipresent here. Neighbors with well cared for homes are afraid to speak out as they have been threatened with death and arson to their properties. There are properties nearby on Laurier Avenue which have been affected by arson. The spring of fire was set below the natural gas meter in an attempt to cause an explosion in the neighborhood. A gun culture is developing as a result of lack of legal enforcement, which will further endanger our communities. Anecdotes of conversations I've had with residents outside the ward highlight that this is not just a Rideau Vanier issue. Speaking with other community leaders across the inner city core show that the city's approach to these problems are not adequate, and people are looking for some way to alleviate them. Many people are absolutely convinced that council will do nothing to protect them. The loss of public trust and confidence in the city's ability to protect them makes people assume that it's not an objective of our council. Unfortunately, you are all held to task on this systematic failure. There is enough experience now on council, councillors past and new, with an awareness that change is needed. Let's give credence to the notions of safe communities, especially in the core wards. Cost to the city is immense because of lack of enforcement. The property nearby has near 150 emergency response calls per year, resulting in over 150,000 in annual costs. This usurps approximately taxes from 50 households without any benefits to the community or our city. It's money wasted. The lack of enforcement informs landlords.
Mr. McConville, if you could just sum up, please, because your time has expired.
As an unelected community leader, along with others, we implore you all to pass this motion in an effort to ensure residents that things are under control. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. McConville. You have a question from Councillor Plant?
Oui, merci. Thank you, Bruce. There's just two things I wanted to add. First, I do want to give, I'm not sure if I said this earlier, a big shout out to all of our first responders here at the city, whether it is bylaw, ambulance, fire, our police, everyone. I know responding to these properties can be extremely stressful for them as well, to constantly sort of have to be on this hamster wheel. So thank you that some of them are in the room. I don't know if you can see them. They're here today. I'm going to shout out Jennifer, especially because she gets probably the bulk of my emails. And second of all, I just wanted to clarify, Bruce, I may have misunderstood your comments, but we are not publishing the addresses of these problematic properties directly on any city website. I believe the Edmonton one has pictures of them, but I don't think they have the addresses. So I just wanted to clarify that that's the goal here. Thank you.
Well, and thanks to all of our responders.
Thank you very much, Mr. McConville. Our next delegate is Kella Barnett.
Thank you very much. So I appreciate the opportunity to speak in support of Councillor Plant's motion. I have prepared remarks. I'm going to read some of them, but I'm going to leave some to the side because I feel like I've learned new things in the last 25 minutes. So I'm here as a resident of Sandy Hill. I'm the vice chair of Action Sandy Hill. You heard my colleague speak earlier. I'm also the co-founder of the Sandy Hill Community Liaison Committee. So I have the privilege of speaking with community members from around Sandy Hill who are all impacted by problematic properties, but differently. And I want to take a moment before I get into it, recognizing my own privilege as a white and cisgender person. I also face intersectional oppression as a queer disabled woman. I'm also a single parent in this neighborhood. So strangely, I'm not actually starting with problematic properties. I want to talk about the City of Ottawa website. It's an overall issue that we can't find information. It's an overall issue that we as citizens can't easily report things. Like I know where the 311 reporting is. I'm a volunteer, right? I'm a city volunteer. Like I work on city stuff, but I don't know why an immigrant family would know where to report problematic property or an issue. I don't know how the refugees sleeping on the floor of a community center know how to report issues with a problematic property. And what this website that Councillor Plant is proposing will do will give us that access. That's all we're asking for, right? This is a first step. If a bylaw needs to be changed, this would allow us to collect data on why that bylaw needs to be changed, right? If, these properties that are vacant are a huge problem. Right, the one that Jerry referred to earlier, when he says social disorder, what he means is drug dealing. What he means is fires. What he means is sex trafficking, right? And sex work, but also sex trafficking and human trafficking to pay drug debts. And if you actually talk to women who are people living with living experience, that's their experience. They're sold in these problematic properties. So we need to start tracking them. We need to start knowing what's going on in our city so that we can respond appropriately. And if that's changing a bylaw so that people can tear these buildings down, so be it. However, I think that that is hiding behind a bigger issue, which is as soon as there's no housing there, so tents will go up. Because that's another issue we have downtown. So what's our end goal? Our end goal is actually housing, affordable housing. And if we don't start tracking what the problems are, how are we going to convince these property owners, these people who are supposed to be stewards of the land, to take responsibility for it? That is what I care about. There's so many students in this neighborhood who don't know their rights. They come here to go to school. They're 19, they're 18. They're paying astronomical amounts of rent. And their landlords are not responsive. They won't fix things. And they don't know how to complain. And frankly, the landlord and tenant board has been so backed up, it's hardly worth it anymore. So where else can they complain, right? What if there's an issue and they don't know if it's a problem? Who do they call? And so it's all about finding a balance. I don't want to blame small landlords for anything. I want the development. I want housing. And I understand that there are issues with construction and all that, but we're talking about people who have, at least in terms of assets, far more economic power, I guess. I don't know what the right word is. But they have far more economic ability than the people who live around these properties and the people who are squatting in these properties. So, and it's their responsibility to take care of it. And the city, I will help the city help them to take care of those properties. And I think that the first step is this website. I'm not trying to vilify people who live on the street because I've been accused of that. That's not the point here. The point here is that those properties create horrible conditions for the same people that are on the street. So let's work together. Let's start with a website, but I don't think it's the end. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kala. Much like you, I've learned a heck of a lot in the last hour or so here as well. I'll turn it over to Councillor Plante for her question. Thank you.
I believe Councillor Troster had her hand up first.
Well, we'll start with committee members and then we'll go to Councillor Troster after.
Great, thank you. So Cal, I just wanted to touch upon that last point. Can you talk about why, and I know you've worked a lot with the shelters in the area. Can you talk about why someone would prefer to go into a vacant unit than say go into an emergency shelter?
Well, generally, and I can't speak for every single shelter, but generally people are afraid of shelters. So that's the first reason. So there's violence in shelters, there's robbery in shelters. I hear reports of people sleeping with shoes on. People feel like they have to keep all their belongings with them. It's not a relaxing space. Some folks leave shelters having not slept and go sleep at a day program because they're so afraid to sleep in the shelters because it's dangerous. There are other reasons. I've heard reports of staff at shelters withholding people's identification information, withholding services if they don't act a certain way. There's also people who are banned from shelters given their level of acuity who cannot find shelter. And so, and those bans is supposed to result in the shelter calling the city to find alternative housing, but that doesn't actually happen. Not every time anyway. So it's very
complex. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Troster.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Kala. I represent Somerset Ward. We have some notorious entire blocks with problematic properties, including one that's constantly of concern. And we've had 3 people die, according to outreach workers at Somerset West Community Health Center, in a block of properties, one of which is now for sale because the landlord did not pay his property taxes. The city's put up for sale. But just as you mentioned, as soon as it was shut down by bylaws being unsafe for occupation, people were squatting there. And at least one woman died during the heat wave last summer due to heat exhaustion. So this is very, very close to my heart, and it's incredibly concerning. I think Councillor Plante's motion is a good first step. I would say some of the other issues that you identify cross over into planning and housing territory, into community services committee territory, which are 2 committees that I'm on. And Councillor Plante is on community services committee with me. So I'm just curious to, something that comes to mind for me, we certainly need more property inspectors. Are there other suggestions beyond just having a registry that you would like to see us move on? Because they might be beyond the scope of this committee, but there's something that we can bring to other committees.
Well, I think like the first thing, I honestly just sort of learned about the bylaw because of a presentation before mine. But that idea of looking at that bylaw and making nuanced changes to it, I don't want to change it completely because there is, an aesthetic aspect around it that is pleasant. But in cases where properties are being left like this, we need to revisit that. We need to talk about, we need more shelters or supportive housing or affordable housing or transitional housing or seniors housing, right? We need all these things. That will help too. that's a whole different conversation. That's community services, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
So this is something that I've been working on, honestly, in the background, which is coordination between city departments. That's what's necessary. What we're talking about with these problematic properties is symptomatic of a huge problem that has to do with lack of coordination between city departments and lack of coordination between levels of government. And so it's about really stepping back and taking a look at the big picture and going, how does this help? How does this help? And how does this help? And how can we all work together to make it happen? Right? A website is a first step around managing problematic properties. But then we have to go and talk about planning and zoning and bylaw. And then we have to go and talk about waste management, right? So.
Yeah, no, and there might be a real opportunity to think about a motion at Planning and Housing Committee, allowing some more latitude around demolition for properties that have been identified as problematic. Although you can understand the whole reason for the way things are set up right now is, number one, to make sure that landlords don't just tear things down and put in parking lots downtown, which is not what we want to see. And also, we don't want people evicted so landlords can have a temporary parking lot and just sit on the land and not use it for housing. So it is really, really tricky. Something also that I'll bring up is that in other cities like Hamilton, they have something called General Issues Committee, where it's like council sits as committee as a whole to discuss interjurisdictional issues. So they did one on encampments, for example, because encampments touches on emergency services, touches on housing, and touches on community services. So, I mean, that's just a thought as we head into our governance review as a city about how we can have conversations that are intercommittee. Maybe it's more special meetings of multiple committees to tackle specific issues, but this issue of problematic properties, one problem that we have is the exact profile that you mentioned, people who are high acuity, who often are in a couple or have a pet. There is no place in shelter that they can go. They will not go because shelters might accommodate families with kids. They don't accommodate couples. They don't necessarily accommodate pets. These are the high acuity folks who are living in encampments or who were squatting in the properties on Catherine Street in Centertown. And they would not go to the one high acuity shelter, which is Shepherds of Good Hope, because they didn't want to be split up or they had bad experiences there. And bless Shepherds, because they're the only high acuity emergency shelter in the city. Nobody else will take folks, but lots of folks won't go. And so this is beyond the scope of this committee, but I think we need to find kind of an intersectional intercommittee way to tackle this specific issue and to find a way to accommodate the folks who are most likely to live in encampments, most likely to squat in a building, and in some cases be a cause of social disorder, because we have absolutely no accommodation for them right now.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I'm 100% on board with your suggestion around committees of the whole. It's an idea I've had too. And it can definitely work in terms of issue specific or wider issues. Yeah, you said something else I wanted to address, but I completely forget. So
yeah, and I just want to thank you. And I was really happy I was listening in. I was like, oh, I have to dial in because this is a real issue, and figuring out how to accommodate this very specific profile of people, I think is really urgent for the city because they are facing the most challenges and sometimes causing the most challenges. And we do not have a good solution right now.
Well, and in the meantime, I mean, we do need more temporary shelters. We need more high acuity temporary shelters. And I've heard that there's willingness for that, but the city's been denying it. So, and there needs to be communication between staff too. I'm tired of council deciding something and then staff sort of just not talking to each other. So it doesn't happen properly. There's gotta be, things have to change. Just at a high level. So thank you very much, Councillor Troster, for coming online. Thank you, Councillor Plante, for making this motion, and I hope everyone will support it.
Thank you very much, Kala, for your delegation. That is the last of our delegations, so we'll move now to questions to staff. Councillor Plante.
Merci beaucoup. You're doing a great job, by the way, as chair, Councillor Hill. Okay, thank you so much. Before I begin, and I know I'm repeating myself here, I do want to thank all of our frontline workers here at the city. I'm in awe of the work you guys do, especially in my community every single day. I know it keeps you quite busy, I'm sure, never a dull moment, but we really do appreciate, and kudos to your staff, Kim. I'm really in awe. I mean that. So I do have, I think, a quick question for you, Roger. I was just wondering, could you talk about, like, do you ever discuss with other jurisdictions about the issues around problematic addresses? Because it is so multi-sectoral and so many intricate different departments involved. So do you ever like, hey, Kitchener, hey, Toronto, like, do you ever have chats with them?
Yes, Mr. Chair, thank you, Councillor, for the question. Just to start off, so we are members of the Ontario Association of Property Standards Officers. We're also members of the Municipal Law Enforcement Officers Association of Ontario. And actually Jennifer sits on the executive board of Ontario Association of Property Standards Officers. So there are several discussions that occur with members across the province in regards to problematic properties and how best to address the growing issue that I think that just about every community in Ontario are experiencing right now.
Great. And my staff also reached out to you guys about possibly doing a community consultation in April and May. Would you be supportive of doing some sort of community, not just obviously with Ward 12, but maybe some larger consultations on the idea of problematic properties?
Mr. Chair, thank you, Councillor, for the question. Yes, absolutely. Always willing to engage the community to understand what the concerns are exactly, and trying to address those as quickly as possible. I think the important piece here when we talk about problematic properties is first coming up with a definition of what is a problematic property. We've heard that from several of the delegations today, and I think that's the start for us, is to, what are we going to consider a problematic property, and how best to tackle the concerns around that, trying to solve those issues.
For sure. And will the bylaw review help in sort of putting all of this into action?
Mr. Chair, sorry, Councillor, I'm not sure what you're referring to in the bylaw review.
Oh, sorry, my question's written down. Can you describe what actions you would be proposing as part of the review to support the implementation of the motion?
Okay, Mr. Chair, I think, I mean, we have our annual report that's coming in May. And part of that annual report is we've addressed some what we have, a growth analysis on FTEs, and part of that is how we deal with property standards complaints. I mean, that's where we're seeing an increase in call volumes, and we've had some discussions with our executive team on how best to address those. Problematic properties is one of the contributing factors. You and I have had those discussions, but dedicated staff is important to this. I mean, we have to be at these properties on a regular basis to be able to be successful in trying to resolve the issues that the community is raising.
Yeah, and then to that end, could, like, just hypothetically, a hypothetical problematic property, how resource intensive is a property like that?
Mr. Chair, again, Councillor, again, trying to define what a problematic address or problematic property is, but definitely, resource intensive, not just for bylaw and regulatory services, but for several departments across the corporation, and Ottawa Police as well. But, some of these, because of legislated timelines, contractor availability, court preparation, delay in the courts, and even for the landlords, from the landlord's perspective, there's delays, with problematic tenants and trying to get evictions and getting before the landlord and tenant tribunal. There's been delays, and I hate to, bring up the pandemic, but we're still experiencing delays both in the court and at tribunal because of the courts and tribunal being shut down for so long. So the landlords are experiencing delays in trying to resolve their own issues, as well as getting eviction notices and things. So yeah, it could take, some of these issues take several months to resolve.
Thank you. I have one last question. So can you maybe provide some insights into potential benefits of having just a centralized webpage that lays out all of the issues we've talked about today?
Mr. Chair, thank you, Councillor. I think the biggest part of the web page, and again, I don't want to predetermine where we're going to end up with this web page, but the work is just starting now. And but I think the process, having some map process on the web page, so the residents have a better understanding of who's responsible for what. An easy way of logging a complaint with the city, being able to provide some details, but also a clear definition of what a problematic property is and a clear understanding of what the expectations are and what the timelines could be to resolve those issues.
Thank you so much. And just to end, I wanted to just shout out Cameron and Alan, who are here from my office, who worked very hard also on this. I know you've had many meetings with them as well. So thanks to everyone involved. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Councillor Plant. Councillor Dudas.
Thank you very much, Chair. First of all, I think that this is a really good motion. I love how it's to explore the feasibility, to look at how to make an Ottawa version of this and not necessarily just to replicate Edmonton. And I will be supporting this motion. I did have a couple of logistical questions though. And I'm currently on the Edmonton website. I looked at it earlier. They have more than just the website. They have an overview initiative that they've launched. They have partnership with the province that even speaks to the Alberta sheriffs coming out. And I know that we've talked about, departmental overlaps within our city. And I'm sure that there's also, Ottawa Public Health overlaps and community social services, as well as probably provincial aspects as well. So I'm just asking for staff's very early on, because we have yet to vote on this. I'm sure you'll have plenty of time to kind of deliberate on it afterwards. How do you see sharing those kind of pieces of information from an Ontario, a City of Ottawa perspective on this webpage? Or do you see it also too that you would need to undertake an overview or initiative, that there's more work attached to it than just launching the webpage with what is being asked for in this motion?
Mr. Chair, Councillor, great question. Again, through Jennifer and I have had discussions through her role as, sitting on the executive with the Ontario Association of Property Standards Officers. We want to engage the public first to get a better understanding of what the concerns are. I mean, we heard several of them today, but the web page, once it launched, I think it's just a start. I mean, we've talked about a task force as well, possibly, a strike team within bylaw and regulatory services that can be proactive for a short period of time to try and have a quicker response, a more consistent response on certain properties. But definitely working with the province through our association to try and leverage some change to legislation if required. We're not sure we'll end up there yet, but there's still some work that needs to be done. But certainly that's part of the consideration.
Okay, and then my next thought goes to timelines, and once again to launch a website, that doesn't take too long. You can probably get that going. We have the services through ottawa.ca. Do you foresee that there might be budget asks in upcoming budgets, that there might be additional work? I mean, Jennifer and everyone on your team, you're dealing with all sorts of different bylaw infractions across the city and issues that pop up. Could we expect that there might be some pressures in terms of resourcing or costing in the future budgets? And I'm just saying that so that we're entering into this with all knowledge ahead of us. So.
Mr. Chair, thank you, Councillor, for the question. As I said, as part of our annual report coming in May, we do have some analysis that we've done on some growth positions that we feel are important for some sustainability for to continue the enforcement efforts that we have now. I don't think there's any secret about, bylaw and regulatory services experienced, a hefty increase in call volumes over the last 5 to 8 years. And there's many different contributing factors to that. So, and also the demand on, you know, a proactive model versus a reactive model. And certainly when we move to proactive work in certain enforcement programs, that is much more labor intensive and requires additional resources to do that type of work.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure we're going into this with eyes wide open, as well as how long it might take for you to produce kind of a more fulsome look at this. But as I said, I'm going to be supporting this motion. I think it's a really good first start. And I do know that there are areas of our city that experience this more than others, but it is across the city, right? There's properties that are issues, and our residents need to be engaged in the process of not only identifying them, but the continual efforts to address the issue on a more permanent basis. So thank you very much to the mover of the motion and to staff for undertaking this.
Thank you very much, Councillor Dudas. Vice Chair Devine.
Thank you, Chair. I'll certainly be supporting the motion as well. And I guess the questions I have are not really very serious, and they revolve around the issue of defining the problematic property. And I remember earlier when we were talking about the innovation within our paramedic services, the chief was answering my question about acuity of pain. And he said, of course, to everyone who calls, their emergency is an emergency, even though we internally say it's a stub toe. And I suppose one reason that you have such a spike in calls is because more and more and more people are calling, describing what they think is a problematic property, what they believe is an extreme violation, when to me, certainly, I'll just speak for myself. Sometimes I get emails, as you get phone calls, that to me, it's really just something that is vexatious. It's frivolous. And so my question, and I'm speaking more about the issue of problematic properties that will pertain to property standards. I guess my first question is, will council at all, because I appreciate hearing that the public will be consulted in the process of defining what problematic properties are. Will council be involved at all in seeing and or agreeing to the definition of problematic properties?
Mr. Chair, Councillor, thank you for the question. We have agreed to engage the councillor who's raised the motion, but I'm happy to sit down and have those discussions with individual councillors as needed. There's no issue there.
All right, I'll keep my eyes peeled for when there's advances in it. And again, I'm speaking really just, as far as I can tell, to concerns over property standards, because I get a lot of emails over things that I really just think are frivolous. Can I assume that in the definition of a problematic property, especially as it may pertain to a property standards issue, that for it to be defined a problematic property, there must at least be history of that problem persisting despite calls for enforcement, despite attempts to mediate? Because surely just the sudden propping up of an issue extending beyond a parameter, just the fact that it automatically goes against a standard for the first time ever, that alone would not necessarily make it a problematic property. I'm going to assume that there has to be history of that problem persisting. Would that be likely?
Mr. Chair, thank you, Councillor. Yeah, absolutely. I think these are substantiated complaints with a lengthy history of non-compliance, where we've had to issue charges or contract at work.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the mover.
Thank you very much. Councillor Plant, do you have any closing comments?
I do. Thank you very much. Bring them up here. Okay, so this website is going to address occupied or vacant residential, rental, or commercial properties that cause frequent and serious safety concerns and complaints to the City of Ottawa. These properties have a history of reoccurring violations relating to development permits, safety codes, nuisance, public health, fire risk, or other illegal activity. They have serious negative impacts on the well-being of the surrounding community and as well as those people living and working in them. It is important we keep an enhanced social justice lens to the renting, working, and people living around these properties. The goal is consultation with the community members affected by problematic properties and to set out a strategy for practical and impactful solutions to address them. such as increased enforcement and escalating consequences to deter repeat offenses, improved communications tool, including a more comprehensive website as we discussed, increasing relationship building, engagement, and inclusion of neighborhood perspectives and the development of solutions which include people with living and lived experience. I really do want to thank again staff who've engaged with me as well as the staff in the Ward 12 office. I do believe we have sort of reached a point where we know that these issues are ongoing and we really have to now turn towards solutions. And Doug Ford will be in town next week and I will also try to chat with him about this issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Plante. So is this motion carried?
Carried.
Thank you very much. Moving on then to item number 9, notices of motions. Are there any notices of motions for our subsequent committee meeting? Seeing none. Item 10, inquiries. Are there any inquiries? Seeing none. Item 11, other business. Is there any other business? Then on to item 12, adjournment. We are adjourned. Thank you very much for the meeting.